Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. We are listening to episode 306. Well, you're listening, I'm talking. And today I am talking about taking pictures of fish. Now, this is something that came up in last week's episode. Episode 305 was a Cast 1 episode, which is kind of a beginner-focused podcast, but it was called Releasing Fish Well. And one of the things that probably leads to poor fish handling more than anything else is trying to get pictures of fish and doing so in a way that keeps the fish out of the water too long, causes you to drop the fish on the ground, you're messing with your camera too much, etc., etc. And that got me thinking, what makes a good fish picture, period, and how do you do that in a responsible way? So those are a couple of things that we're going to talk about today. How to take good pictures of fishing, period, not just of fish, and also what is a responsible way to do that when you actually have a fish as the subject matter of your photography. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer on the front end. I am not an expert photographer. I think I have a little bit of an eye for it. I think I have a little bit of an artistic bent to me, but I'm certainly not someone who knows the ins and outs of how cameras work to the level that I'm going to give an exhaustive treatise on the topic. That being said, there are some great resources out there. I can't remember the guy who did it, but I remember very early on when I was getting more involved in the fly fishing industry, I went to a very brief seminar on taking good fish pictures. This is not one of the big fishing shows, but it's at a small local fly fishing show in Pennsylvania, and it was absolutely fascinating. He talked more in depth about how to use cameras. Now, this was at a time where cell phone cameras weren't ubiquitous. He was talking about using some of the early DSLR cameras. And a lot of that still can transfer over to somebody who knows how to not just use their cell phone camera, but use some of the apps that are available to really augment and amplify the capabilities of a contemporary iPhone or Samsung or something like that. And so actually that's going to be the first thing I'm going to say. One, if you want more technical information, it's out there, and it's out there within the fishing and the outdoor space. There's plenty of resources that you can find on YouTube and on websites. I like how on YouTube, when you go to some of these videos where people are walking through how to use the apps that come pre-installed on your phones, they walk through what the different settings do. They don't just say, hey, to take a best picture, do X, Y, and Z. They show you how pulling X to one side or the other, toggling Y this way or that, actually accomplishes different things when it comes to lighting, when it comes to shadows, when it comes to the composition as far as the structure of the photograph. Those are really, really helpful things to see what those do. You can also mess around with them on your own, but then also finding apps that are free that can actually increase the capabilities are really, really helpful. So I would send you in a lot of different directions online. Just Google it, really, first and foremost, to find apps that can be helpful for adding a little bit more to what you already have on your phone. And that's really what I'm going to focus also. I carried a DSLR on my person in my fly fishing pack in the early days of casting across, but I found that, as I got new phones, the ability to take good pictures really got to the point where the DSLR, anyway, it was unnecessary, but it was just not a good trade-off of carrying that, given my lack of expertise with it, versus carrying simply a phone in my pack, and how it really did some very good smoothing out of the edges of my intermediate photography skills. So those are a couple of preamble style things that I wanted to throw out there. And again, are you entering this for a magazine or for a photo contest, or are you doing it for your own social media and enjoyment? Like, those are two important things to acknowledge. If you are trying to develop a brand, which not all of us are, and even if you think you are, you probably aren't. I mean, casting across even is what it is. It's not a photo focused thing. I talk about my writing, then my speaking, and then photography drops down to like a distant third. More often than not, it's just simply to communicate something. It's to show something. It's to share something. It's not necessarily to have something so polished that it is going to shock and awe people on its own merit. So there's something just to consider as you think about taking pictures of fish and fishing. But we all love to do it. I mean, I don't know how often I find myself standing there in the middle of the stream, even before I've caught a fish, saying, I really want to capture what I'm experiencing right now. And of course, it's impossible. I mean, even the best angling photographers, the kind of pictures that make it onto big posters that fly shops have up on their walls and on the headers of fly fishing companies' websites, and the kind of thing that you may want on the desktop of your laptop. Those kind of pictures still do not fully capture not only the scene in totality, the smells and the sounds and the feelings, but even what you can see. We've all had the experience. We have a panorama we want to capture, and even with the fanciest features on our phone, we still cannot capture it. And I think that's important to realize. And so every photograph you're taking, whether it be of something minute, the adipose fin of a brown trout, or something grand, an entire panorama of sitting, being in a mountain meadow and having the water, the immediate terrain, and then the grand soaring mountains with the sky behind it, you are never ever going to completely capture the entire essence of that. And I think as the subject matter grows, that increases exponentially. So your task, your challenge, and really your opportunity as a photographer is to be able to represent what you are seeing and experiencing in a way that you're at least telling part of the story. And not to get too artistic or philosophical about it, but that's ultimately what it comes down to. And so you will be discouraged if you try to get everything. And more than that, I think you'll be disappointed if you try to get everything. If you take if you take a video instead of a photograph, a video is not going to have the same lasting impact. If you sweep around on that mountaintop with your video camera and you have the wind beating against the microphone on your phone, it's not going to have that same sort of pop as a well composed and set up photograph. So again, that's another kind of preamble thing, but something to think about when we go to take pictures of what we're experiencing. Take lots of pictures. I think that's another thing that's actually one of the pieces of advice that I got early on. Take lots of pictures, but then delete lots of pictures. This is true of fly fishing. This is true of my kids. I go back to the early days of my kids, and there may be 20 pictures of a baby holding something. And does that mean I want to keep only one? No, but I can probably whittle it down to 3 or 4, especially if they're making the same face or not even looking at the camera. And so now I go back and it's almost overwhelming the quantity of photographs to wade through. And consequently, I don't end up looking at them as much as I should or maybe want to. The same is true when you're fly fishing. When you're out on the river, take pictures, lots and lots of pictures. This is helpful when you are shifting slightly in your perspective because you may gain a little bit more light. The exposure from the sky and the sun and the ambient light may be a little bit better, even incrementally from one photo to the next. And then especially when you're taking pictures of fish, a moving target. Taking lots of pictures of a fish, whether it be a whole body shot of a fish or just part of the fish, when it's in the water or on the water, or even out of the water if done well. Getting lots of pictures, you're able to flip through and say that in this one, there's some really cool water droplets coming off the fish. In this one, it was moving a little bit, so it's a little bit blurry. In this one, the water was moving over the fish in such a way that it actually created a cool effect. In this one, the water is effectively just transparent, so you get a really good view of the fish, but it maybe isn't as artistic as the other one. And then go through and say, all right, out of these 100 pictures, maybe I'll keep 25. Maybe I'll only keep 5. Maybe I'll keep 50. But to get into the habit of looking at your pictures after you've been on the water, going through, deleting them, and picking the ones that are the best. And then those are the ones that you go and then edit. There's some that no amount of editing is going to help and fix. But because that may happen in any given photograph, that's why it's also important to take lots of pictures of your subject matter, particularly if it's something that you really, really want to attempt to capture. So talked about already being familiar with your hardware and your software, the camera and the apps that are on it. Being familiar with really the fact that you have an artistic challenge, an opportunity in front of you. You're not really capturing everything. You're capturing some things, and then also that you want to take a lot of pictures because then it presents you with a greater spectrum of photographs that you're able to work with and keep. The next thing, and again, this all kind of come down to artistic perspective and expectations. Um, don't think about capturing the entire picture. So this kind of plays into what I mentioned before. And here's a great example of it. You catch a nice brown trout and you think this is a pretty fish, or this is a fish that I'm just happy I caught. Maybe it's my first fish in a particular stream. Maybe it's my first fish of the season. Maybe it's just it has a really bright blue cheek or a really red adipose fin, or the spots are really pretty. Now, you have a couple of options here. You've caught the fish and you've played it well, and it's in the bottom of your net. You can simply take a picture of that fish in the bottom of your net. There's nothing wrong with that. You go on the website, you're going to see pictures like that. You go on my phone, you're going to see pictures like that. Sometimes I like to take that first picture of that fish with that sort of setup. Well, now what I try to do when I do it is make sure it is in such a way that that fish is either diagonal across my lens of my camera. So if you're looking at that photograph and it's in a horizontal or landscape mode, either that nose is on the left-hand side and the tail is on the right, or the nose is on the upper left and the tail is on the lower right, or vice versa. But what that allows me to do is maximize the amount of fish that's in that shot. And then also that the bag is not over top of that fish. That's another benefit of using a rubber bag net, is that it doesn't fold over usually. It's pretty rigid. And that, my hand might not be in it. Maybe the frame of my net is, but even then, try to eliminate as much of those other things as possible. Now, what happens with that? One, you have a picture of that fish. So if you want to say, I caught that fish, I remember that fish, I want to release that fish, you at least have a picture of that fish. And then if you want to get more artistic, which will come into play as you go to release the fish, you take it out, the hook out of its mouth, it's going to swim away if it's got enough spunk left in it. And now you at least have that picture of that fish in your net. Now, again, this is not something I want to see 1,000 of these. If I start to scroll on someone's social media and I see 1,000 pictures of fish in net, I'm going to say, okay, these are all essentially the same. But now you have an opportunity to do some really cool things. So you drop down in the water with your fish in your net, and maybe you instead of that photograph being of a concave net where you're looking down into the net, you drop that net over your hand where you're still cradling that fish in your hand. And now you can take pictures with, although the net is still underneath that fish and you're using it in between your hand and the fish to kind of hold it and support it and give you a little bit of a grip on the fish. You can take either whole body shots of that fish in the water, or zoom in on its head, zoom in on its tail, maybe take different perspectives. So head towards tail, tail towards head. Um, you know, pictures of fish bellies aren't particularly good, but pictures of their back, pictures kind of different perspectives are really kind of cool and artistic. And that's where you're going to get most of the color. When you do this, a few things to consider, and this is true of any small subject matter. Where is the sun or the primary light source? The sun, when you're outdoors, being the primary one that you have to consider. Is it directly behind you such that your shadow, either of your head, your torso, your hand, or your camera, casting a bizarre shadow on that fish? I don't know how many pictures of fish have been ruined because the subject matter I wanted to capture was the colors or the pattern on that fish, but my camera, even just the corner of it, pops up into it. So there's this weird, angular shadow that is now cast on the fish. And that you fix that not by moving the fish, you fix that by moving your body. It is better to have a little bit more exposure because the sun is brighter on the fish, but you don't have a shadow, than to have a shadow that's compromising the fish, because you can always mess with the exposure as you're going in and editing the fish picture, but you can't necessarily take that shadow out completely when it's being cast upon the fish. So again, that's something that I like to do. Maybe get that preliminary picture of that fish if you really want to document the fact that you caught that fish. But then if you want to take some better, more artistic, prettier pictures, you drop that net off of that fish, maybe still have it underneath, or you take the fish out of the water, out of the a net, but then holding that fish in the water, you can take a few pictures of that. But then you can, do fun things of having that fish being released, where you're snapping a bunch of pictures as that fish is sliding out of your hand. Or I think some of my favorite photographs are pictures of the fish partially submerged. Maybe only its dorsal fin out of the water, maybe just its tail out of the water as you're supporting it gently underneath. Maybe it's a horizontal shot of that fish partially submerged, where you have its nose to the bottom top half of its tail up out of the water, but it's still underwater. And again, assuming you're not squeezing it tightly. And then there's other things you can do too in this moment. You can take a picture of that fish as you drop it into the water gently, and assuming it's not going to jet off right away, taking a picture of it submerged inches below the water. And again, the lighting conditions and the clarity of the water and how fast the water is moving is going to really determine if this is an option or not. But that's why you snap that thing 5 or 6 times. It doesn't cost any more money to tap your finger 14 times real fast as that fish is swimming away. And maybe 1 or 2 of those is going to be a really cool picture, assuming then you go back and you take out the bad ones. But those kind of pictures are, again, a lot more aesthetically pleasing than the fish in the bottom of the net and you grabbing that fish and squeezing it. That's bad for the fish. It's not good for aesthetics. Now, as I mentioned in last week's podcast, I'm not opposed to a grip and grin every now and again. I think there can be a lot of value to it. But if you think that's necessary for that fish that you caught, it's best to have someone there to help you do it. And if not, if you absolutely feel like this is a necessary thing and you have a tripod or you have some sort of GoPro or some sort of rig to set up, and actually here's where I would recommend a piece of gear. They have a camera phone. Yeah, they have phone clips that have kind of a bendable base, like a tripod, but each leg of the tripod is a rubber-coated wire that is bendable. And you can attach it to a limb. You can attach it to your fly rod as you set your fly rod up against something. You can use it as a tripod on a rock. And with that fish in its net underwater, get that all set up, get it ready to go. Make sure you know how to use that phone so you can quickly get to your timer. You get it framed up within reason, not perfectly, because it's not going to be perfect considering what you're doing. And then you snap that picture. And, most phones are going to take a 10-shot burst and then let the fish go. If it's not perfect, it's not perfect, but you gave it a shot. And doing all of that while the fish is underwater, not holding the fish like a football in your armpit while you are trying to get that all set up. And that's where I would say another thing, going back all the way to the beginning, just be familiar with what your phone can do, especially if you're going to be taking pictures of fish out of the water, so you can do it quickly and easily. Now, beyond that, going back to something I mentioned already, just be aware of where the sun is. There can be wonderful pictures where the sun is actually very bright, washing things out. That is a great way to capture the experience because, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the sun shine brightly on the water. And there are good pictures that are washed out because you are composing that photograph in such a way that is an aspect of the picture. It's not taking away from the picture. It is actually adding to it. So once again, how do you do this? You move your body around. You're not going to be able to move the sun. You're not going to be able to move the river. But as you move around, say, even just in a 360-degree perspective, taking a picture, say the river is completely upstream, or the river is completely upstream. Well, obviously, the sun is perfectly upstream. It's at your 12 o'clock, if upstream is 12 and downstream is 6. Taking a picture with that sun blazing on that water, you're going to see some interesting things, but a lot of it's going to be washed out. But as you pivot to that 2 o'clock position, you're going to have that sun shining brightly on part of the water, light, creating an illuminated portion of that photograph. But then you're also going to have the well-lit foreground of the water and the stream side. You move to 3 o'clock, it's just going to be brighter on one side than the other. You move to 6 o'clock, and now you're dealing with your shadow. But if you raise up that camera a little bit more, that's the picture ultimately where you're not going to have any significant influence of the sun. It's just going to be ambient light. And so again, that's a very cursory and very non-technical way of thinking about it. But consider where the sun is as you take pictures. You can position the sun behind a tree. You can position it behind a ridge, and you can completely transform what you're taking pictures of. Other things to consider when you're taking pictures is where's the horizon line? I think there's really cool pictures where you are 50-50, especially when you're trying to capture things like reflections on still water, where you have a perfect corollary between what's above the horizon line and what's below the horizon line. You have these cool reflections of trees and mountains and clouds from what's above and what's below. But then you also have good pictures where the majority of the subject matter is above the horizon line. Now, when we're fishing, we're probably wanting to take pictures of the water, but at the same time, if you want to capture the panorama of what's around you, then, finding that good ratio of what's below the horizon line to what's above the horizon line. And then flipping it, you can take some amazing pictures of water and of streamside vegetation, and even what is further away, assuming the perspective is right. You have mountains in the distance, and they are such that there's a valley, so there's still some sky, where you're able to capture sky and mountains in the top quarter of your photograph, and the bottom three quarters are mostly water and rocks, and maybe even that's where you have your fish positioned. You can create some really interesting photographs that go beyond the scope of I just took a picture of the water. I just took a picture of a fish. I just took a picture of a fish in net. I just took a picture of me smiling holding another 14-inch rainbow trout. These definitely give you some options. Now, I've been talking about this 20 minutes in very general and sometimes vague and maybe even confusing terms. But there's some other things to consider. Um, Incorporating things like your net, incorporating things like your reel and your rod. Uh, Good pictures where a reel and a rod are included, in my opinion, are the butt section of the rod, the handle, the reel, and 6 inches to 18 inches of the butt section of the blank. To kind of have a rod blank simply running across the photograph, unless you're trying to get an ad for that particular rod and you have it lined up so you have the name of that rod in there, it's not going to be particularly interesting. Maybe you have a measuring stick on the side of your rod, and in that case, I get it. But to have a rod and a picture, to have the handle and the reel seat and the butt of the rod and the reel in it as well is going to be nice also. But you probably don't want that in the foreground. You want the fish to be in the foreground. Just a way to, you consider the composition of that photograph. And if you're going to do that, take care of the fish, not your rod and your reel. Your rod and your reel are meant to get wet, and so is the fish. So don't spend an inordinate amount of time getting your rod and reel set up beautifully to take a picture of the fish with it. Simply have that as a complementary part of the picture. The same thing is true with your hand. Just be cognizant of where your hand is as you're holding fish. Uh, we don't want pictures of your knuckles and your fingernails. I bite my fingernails. I try to keep my fingernails out of as many fish pictures as possible. So it's something just to be aware of. And again, not to spend too much time handling fish, but if you're going to do it, just consider where your hand is, where your wrist is, where your forearm is. You can take a really bad picture of a good sized fish if your forearm, because of perspective, is occupying the majority of the frame. So these are things that you don't want to spend time figuring out while you're on the water, but just to be aware of as you plan on taking fish photographs. All right. So I may have, opened up a bunch of cans of worms with people who are professional or amateur outdoor photographers, but just some things to think about to create better pictures. So to summarize, know your gear, know the software that is included in your gear, have a plan for how you're going to photograph fish, take care of the fish, take good pictures. Take lots of pictures, and then don't be afraid to go back and edit the good ones and discard the bad ones. And then think of creative things prior to that moment when that fish is in your hand and the clock is effectively ticking before you have to release it. So that's 23 minutes. I bet you could have a 23 podcast series on all the aspects of fly fishing photography. They're out there, and I recommend them to you because they'll only serve to amplify what you bring off of the water, which one of the great things of it is your memories and then also communicating it to others. Do you have anything that I missed that you would say is necessary or essential? Let me know. Matthew@castingacross.com. This week on the podcast, the first article is called River Songs, a review of a hit. So I was able to review and read Steve Duda's River Songs, Moments of Wild Wonder in Fly Fishing. And it is another great book. So I think this is back-to-back weeks of book reviews. No, they're spread about 3 weeks apart. But again, this is a series or compilation of short stories. But I'll let you go read the review, but they are very well written. I can't say that enough. Just a really fun and really compelling read by a guy who's just a different cat than me, and so it's kind of fun to read that. So River Songs, a Review of a Hit by Steve Duda, and you can find the link for his book in the review over at castingcross.com. Wednesday's article, Outdoors via Online in VA. So I know this is not super applicable to you if you live in like New Mexico or in North Dakota or something like that. But there's a very good chance that your state agency, whether it be hunting, fishing, or just some sort of outdoor agency, has some good stuff on it. And I use the Virginia Department of Fish and Wildlife's website and a couple of things that they're doing as a case study. They have a outdoor initiative that is a fundraising program. And actually, what's a cool thing about Virginia is they're pretty transparent about how they use their funds and how they raise their funds. And so this is a hiking initiative that is being used to raise funds for some of their partner nonprofits. So it's a cool program. And part of that is they're giving people who do this initiative some OnX backcountry access, which is OnX's hiking platform for their app. And there's a couple other things that I thought were cool that were worth sharing. And I'm not super complimentary of government agencies all the time, and so I figured I would give credit where credit is due. So you can check that out over at castingacross.com. This week's recommendation is a company I just haven't talked about enough, especially in recent years, and that's Risen Fly Fishing. Risen Fly Fishing is a fly shop now. They were an online retailer, but they became a fly shop during the pandemic, and they are thriving. They've had to move, they've had to expand, and the reason why is they have good stuff, well thought out products, but the customer service is just spectacular. And so I'm just going to tell you to head over to risenfly.com. I'll put a link to Risen Fly Fishing over at the show notes of this page. But I use Risen Fly rods and reels and fly tying tools and fly tying supplies and a bunch of other stuff. One of my favorite t-shirts is a Risen Fly Fishing t-shirt. So if you want to know like specific product information, you can go to the search bar over at castingacross.com and put in Risen Fly, and there's a bunch of reviews of stuff, and target species kits, all sorts of stuff. So definitely check that out and let me know if you have any questions. But by all means, reach out to the good folks at Risen Fly Fishing, and they can definitely get you what you need, especially if you're looking for good stuff at a reasonable price. And if you are in the Western PA region, Eastern Ohio, definitely stop and check them out. Again, I'll put a link for Risen Fly Fishing over at the show notes for this podcast page over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in iTunes and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.